want your opinions on this, Dane.
Oh, this is so awesome.
Vladimir Putin has ordered the Russian government to look into developing video game consoles, both stationary and portable. This comes following Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony halting sales in the country. Now, that happened like 2 years ago, right? As soon as the sanctions came down. Because I remember this because the first thing that he did after they got sanctioned by everyone, he goes, pirate. He legalized piracy in the country.
He did.
Yeah.
So, my first thing to say is that this is based, and second is that what's it gonna be, the Russia box?
Yeah, our box.
And what would be the impetus to do this? Would it be to quell, dissent
to
in
keep
Russia?
Western, well, I mean, if you approve pirating, right, that means that people are getting games, but Russia has a pretty big stranglehold over like the content that's seen there, right? So,
I wouldn't know.
Right? So the issue would be like if he wants to keep people, it's kind of like there was this great meme going around today. It was a big picture of Kim Jong-un with this picture like on a huge billboard being driven around the town. It says, when you take a great selfie, but you've banned the internet in your country. I
wonder if Russia has their like Russian station or Russian box console.
Probably.
And then what if they make a really good game? I wonder if it'd be banned here.
It would. Oh yeah, it wouldn't get through here. I mean, people would probably mod and pirate it.
See, I find this surprising just because I thought his position would be like, good, I don't want you to have video games anyway.
That's
what you would think, yeah.
Yeah, go cut wood. Like go do something useful. But apparently not.
I just thought it was interesting. So there's a fairly well-known skater from Russia, right? And I thought it was really interesting when Russia and Ukraine first happened, watching what was going on there, because he has a very strong internet presence, and he had to start using like what do you call it? He'd like mask his IP.
Oh, okay.
Like to be able to post
with VPN.
Yeah, it's use VPNs and mask his IP to get content out and stuff like that. And I was happy to see that most of the people in the space didn't just blindly dislike this dude because he was from Russia, which is what I expect the very least out of humanity. Yep. So I expect when the world is telling you Russia bad, that everyone's going to start hating on this dude. I was pleasantly surprised to see that wasn't the case.
Yeah, I think.
But these are like the consequences of living in a world now where everything is connected.
I think people have wised up. It's like maybe not Russia bad, but the government. You know what I mean? Not saying like Russia in particular, but governments.
A lot of people can't distinguish the difference, though. I mean, remember what people were saying about when we were criticizing. Oh, can we talk about COVID? Yeah, I don't know. When people were criticizing the Chinese government, and then people were being upset because they were assuming that you meant the people of China, when nobody's saying that. They're saying this is what they're criticizing the government for. But they could make their own video game systems, and that would actually be really, really interesting to see how a lot of these countries would probably have a lot more unbridled creativity because they'd have less to work with, and they'd have to kind of rely on themselves rather than relying on these big. There's so much going on in video games right now that we don't talk about here because this just isn't a video game channel. But everything going on in the West right now, whether it's talking about Sweet Baby Inc. or what's going on with Black Girl Gamers and all of those things, it's like there's so much distraction in all of these industries that the hardest thing for me to imagine is how anything gets done at all. But if you strip the operation down to just your coders and your developers, and you're just doing it for the people of your country, I bet you some really creative ideas end up coming from something like that.
It's funny that you mentioned that because my favorite podcast is Resident Arc on YouTube, and it's basically like a video game book club.
Cool.
And they were talking about that they both of them rubbed shoulders and worked for the industry, and they were talking about how little they read gaming news, and I think it's because the gaming world is kind of a vacuum of the real world, where that when you're reading news, there's gonna be some political inclination and propaganda, etc., and like the gaming sphere is completely the same. And they were basically.
Why do you think that it? Why do you think it makes its way in there?
Well, because the activists,
I mean, I know technically I know the answer. It's really higher to do this stuff.
Yeah,
and
it's
stuff like that.
It's just that. Wow.
What's interesting is I think a lot of it, because it's the same in movies and television, right? Like when I watch an old movie or an old television show and I see some sort of political bend to the writing, I actually have a lot more leeway to it now because news was just not as plentiful back then, which means that they had to actually care about it, right? So I would rather watch a movie that has politics in it from somebody who actually cares about it rather than somebody who just got into it because armchair expert, now their phone feeds them that information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Back in the day, you had to actually care and it had to actually inform your writing, which means that they were also probably more discerning and more willing to actually incorporate it in a way that was creative because it wasn't all that there was. It wasn't all they read all day long every day. But with modern, journalism, whether it's gaming, movies, and television, there is a political bend to just about every one of these newspapers.
Right.
One of the things that came out recently that I was actually really appreciative of was the Hollywood Reporter did a write-up on Gina Carano that, for the most part, stayed apolitical. There was a couple of jabs in there, but it wasn't nearly as bad as something like that could have been. And props to her for being willing to do the interview because she puts herself at risk by doing that, by taking any mainstream outlet for somebody like that. And the sad fact is that shouldn't be the case. You should not have to worry about going to a mainstream outlet and getting a fair interview. But if they can't even do it within gaming, how the hell do they expect to do it within movies, television, and all these other platforms, which are just as big, right? What's a Russian game they should make?
My first instinct is that they would make
Their own
a Call of Duty where they're the good guys.
their own version of Duke Nukem.
Maybe that'd be awesome.
Something where it's like escape the bear in your neighborhood. Like all the videos you see. It's like, oh shit, there's a bear.
And he's just roaming around.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen those videos, right? Where it'll be like somebody walking down the street and then a bear just comes out.
But to finish the point I was trying to say, basically they came to the conclusion that they were so much happier and when they stopped listening to gaming news because gaming news was anything but.
Yeah.
Like they would never talk about gaming.
Only the social implications of the game.
Basically.
Which never actually comes to pass anyways, because that's not actually why people buy games. What was that you that I was talking about recently with somebody talking about like, who was it? Talking about like people who read reviews for games or actually like pay attention to who wins awards for games like that. Like, does anybody actually buy? Does anybody actually buy games for winning an award?
Absolutely not.
Like nobody's buying comics because they win Eisners.
Also, it's funny that you mentioned reviews because reviews is also like a very contentious thing because a game just came out that's very critically acclaimed by the fans, but some guy in IGN. It's called Dragon's Dogma 2.
Okay, yeah.
Some guy in IGN gave it a 30 out of 100, and everyone's like, "What?" And so basically, this guy, he's becoming famous for being a contrarian, and normally IGN is famous for giving everything a 9. Everything is like, well, it's because it was found out back in like 2010 that like AAA developers like Ubisoft, they give some companies the like a copy of their games in advance, so they would have their review post launch.
Okay.
With the condition that you can't rate it anything less than X,
Which is insane.
It is, yeah,
And corrupt.
That's why everything is always a 9.
Yeah. And that bums me out because it would be one thing if this was like an individual, but these are sites that are claiming to be user advocates and somebody that's supposed to be there. Like the whole point of something like that to exist is to inform you, is to supposedly inform you, the consumer, like, yes, it's safe to buy this game. It's a 9. Most of the time with movie reviews, for instance, these days, outside of like the really, really hyper polarizing stuff like Dave Chappelle, you're still pretty well off looking at just look at all the reviews and get the general score for it, right? So right now, okay, I'll tell you why. Because when people go, if you're going to a movie that you have no interest in, most people these days who are writing reviews for consumers, if you're already going to see the movie, you're predisposed to liking it anyways. At least that's what it seemed like to me. Most of the Disney movies that have come out recently have had higher audience scores than critic scores because if you still are, letting Disney punch you in the face repeatedly and get back up to go then see the next movie, you're already predisposed to lying to yourself about whether it's a good movie or not. Lying to yourself, of course, being a generalized definition, doesn't mean that they don't like it, but they can cope.
Yep.
And like it and give it a high review, whereas the aggregated score is usually closer to what the actual quality of it is right now. So right now, Godzilla vs. Kong rated like a 93 from the fans and like a 53 or something from the critics. So is it a 53? I don't know. But if you like Godzilla and Kong, you're likely to rate it higher. Mm-hmm. And that's just a product of being part of IP. That if you're predisposed to liking this stuff, it's going to get a higher score.
And also the one advantage that games have is there's such things as like YouTube and Twitch. So I don't necessarily have to depend on a review. I can go watch someone play it and be like, oh, I think I'd like that, and then buy it.
I'm sure a lot of people do that anyways, especially the new generation.
Yeah, especially because, reviews aren't reliable.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. Listen to full episodes of Pop Culture Crisis on Spotify.
Keep up with us on social media and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the show. Bye, guys.